Hi everyone, David McGinley here at the International Association for Near-Death Studies Conference near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm sitting here with Reverend John Price and John, you and I met a few years ago at the Arlington conference.
Right.
And that was a great gift to sit with you.
Well, thank you.
And get to know you, and it felt so significant. Because you have this extensive career supporting people in the military. Can you tell us a bit about that and how near-death experiences came up?
I was a chaplain in the Texas Army National Guard for 30 years. And simultaneously, I had churches in San Antonio, Austin, and in a suburb of Houston. In all that time, I found it fascinating the differences between civilian ministry and military chaplaincy. In the military, in the church, I would really only be dealing with people who would come to church. But in the military, I had the whole breadth of religious experience and denominational experience, and including many who had no religious experience or activity. But I was their chaplain and related with them. In fact, my own background to this whole subject of the near-death experience was that I was raised in a very scientific family. Oh. My father was professor of oceanography at Texas A&M, and everything was materialistic. Now, I don't mean that in the sense that we had fancy cars or anything like that, but the whole...
what you see is what you get.
What you see is what you get, and there was no real spirituality about it. It was... and he came out of a period in which, he scoffed at spiritualism, the movement in the 19th century that... there was a lot of trying to contact spirits and the like, and he scoffed at that. And so I was not prepared to accept somebody when they said, well, I had a near-death experience. Well, they wouldn't have used that term. I died and I had this experience, and I was not inclined to believe that.
Yeah.
Until Raymond Moody's book came out.
Life After Life.
Life After Life. And then, the next month, I was on active duty at Fort Hood in Texas, and a soldier was in a jam because he'd fallen off a tank and had a green stick fracture of a leg. And the doctors had taken care of it by putting him in a walking cast and gave orders, as the doctors could, for him to go back to San Antonio and not to go back to light duty with the Texas Army National Guard. Mm. But the Guard had no way of getting him back to San Antonio. And the Chief of Staff, a colonel, brought me in to see what I might add to the conversation. And he said he'd ridden up in a convoy, and we didn't have a way of getting him back to San Antonio. And I said, well, I know what to do, Colonel. He won't fit in my Toyota Corolla, but he'll fit in your Ford LTD. Give me the keys to your car, Colonel. And he said, that's it. So he gave me the keys, and I went over and got him, and I said, hi, I'm Chaplain John Price, and we're going to take you home to San Antonio. Well, he was just amazed because he didn't know what to expect, and he didn't expect me to walk in.
Yeah.
Well, we weren't off of Fort Hood before he started telling me about the life he'd had as a child that he was not proud of. Sniffing glue and paint in elementary school, marijuana in junior high, and hard stuff. Dropped out of high school and went to California for the drug scene, where one night somebody gave him a pill that was something wrong with it, and he described his experience. And it was the full 12 steps that Raymond Moody had discussed. And I was just astonished because I realized he had died. He did not use that term. Yes. He didn't claim that he had died. He didn't claim that he sat down with Jesus, but that he had this review of his life in which he was shown how he was throwing the gifts of God back in the face of God.
So the life review is part of those 12 steps, indicative of a near-death experience, which include an out-of-body experience, knowing you're dead, traveling through a tunnel sometimes,
Right.
encountering
That's what he said.
entities of light, encountering God as a being of light or a presence, having information given to you. Sometimes there's a sense of music, expanded consciousness, sense of being one with everything.
He described every step of that.
Right.
It was a classic near-death experience. And then he was told, it's not your time, his body. And his buddies were startled that he was back to life because they realized he had died. And he walked away, cold turkey, from the drug scene. Went
Wow.
back to San Antonio, apologized to his parents, got back in high school, graduated from high school, and joined the Texas Army National Guard, where I met him with his broken leg. He turned my thinking around, and it was a dumbfounding moment for me, and I'm so grateful to him.
That's interesting that he turned your thinking around, because here we are, clergy,
Yes.
we're
yeah,
all about the business of heaven,
That's right.
but it's surprising how people don't talk about this even in the church,
Right.
for
right.
fear that they're going to be seen as crazy or that it was imagination.
I went to 2 seminaries to talk to the students about the near-death experiences and how to relate pastorally, and the 2 seminaries rebuffed me. But when I go to a gathering of clergy, they're excited to learn about it because they've seen enough about this.
Yes.
And they're the ones that are really dealing with people having these experiences. And I make the point to them, if you've got a congregation of 100 people, you're liable to have 18 of them, according to Gallup's book,
Yeah.
that have had the experience.
Almost 1 in 5.
Right. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And clergy in the churches understand this. Well, in the Episcopal Church anyway. Some denominations seem to be utterly opposed to the idea.
Or seeing it as something occult, or
Right, but if
particular.
your culture in these other denominations is that God is a terrible judge who's going to throw you in hell if you ever sin, that's not reality. And
no, God is love. And you encounter that love in its essential form without filters.
Right,
Wow.
right. Yes, you've had how many? 3 experiences, as
No,
I
I've
recall.
had 4 rounds of cancer, but 1 near-death experience. Incredible expansion into love and feeling utterly congruent and authentic and safe and connected and part of it all. It was.
It's exactly what I keep hearing from
Yeah.
people who've had the experience.
How often have people shared with you?
I've spoken with 370 people now who've had the experience.
And you have a fantastic book.
Thank you.
Is it Glimpse of Heaven?
Revealing Heaven.
Revealing Heaven.
There's 3 books by that title, but the other 2 are written by a woman.
Okay.
And the subtitle is The Christian Case for Near-Death Experiences.
So check that out. It is on Amazon. Revealing Heaven.
HarperCollins, 2013.
Yeah. I loved it because it's very readable, very concise, and if you want to, as a member of the clergy, if you want to get a grasp on this phenomenon, this is a great book.
Yep. When HarperCollins editors and I finally agreed on a final text, I took my copy to the print shop at our church, and I said, give me 5 copies of this, because we had 5 families in which a spouse was dying. And I took those books to those 5 families and told them what it was all about. And I said, you may find this to be a big help in dealing with the coming event.
Yeah.
And get back to me when you finished reading it. And they did, and it was a transformative experience for all 5 of the families. One husband read a chapter a night to his wife, and she died within 2 weeks. And the atmosphere in the family turned so positively.
No
towards
longer swallowed by grief and sorrow,
That's right.
but to have that grief also infused with profound hope and confidence that
Right.
their loved one will continue
Yes, and that they'd see each other,
Yeah,
when his time came.
that's right, because the most common experience of the dying is to see the spirit of a loved one who's already passed on as their welcoming party to prepare them.
I visited with quite a few who, in the grand reunion following their arrival on the other side, saw people they didn't know existed, such as a sister who'd been miscarried.
Who died before that person was born.
Right.
I've also had that experience in which a dying individual who had not spoken for a week lay on the edge of death and started saying the name of his sister who predeceased him before he was born. Died as an infant.
I have an account in my book of a nurse in London who was dealing with a lady who was dying of bone cancer. And the doctor that she was working with took such pity on this dying patient who was in excruciating pain that he decided to give her a fatal dose of morphine.
Right.
And then detailed this nurse to keep the vital signs records. And she did, and she saw the vital signs go right down. And then she was writing all this up when the lady started breathing again. And she was startled by this, spontaneous. No one was going to resuscitate her. And she said, I had the strangest dream. I dreamt that I went to heaven and my daughter was there. But it couldn't be. My daughter's alive. And the nurse went and told the doctor, who came and informed her that indeed her daughter had been killed that afternoon driving to the hospital to see her. So she knew, she learned in the experience that her daughter had indeed died.
Wow.
That's how real these things are.
Yes. And then she died soon afterwards.
Yes. She said, oh, then she is there. And I did die. And so she closed her eyes and went to sleep permanently.
And she heard this news that her daughter had died, but she saw her daughter. And as the other accounts demonstrate, that encounter was more real than what you and I share here.
Right.
Because
exactly.
Suddenly you're more alive than you ever have been here.
Now, if you think that this might be just because of grown-ups rationalizing a situation, I want to tell you about a little girl who the mother was at age 8 weeks of this child's life. The mother was in a hurry and she was trying to get the child to nurse, and I'm afraid she pushed the baby's mouth on her breast, but the mother neglected to do anything about the fact that the child's nasal passages were blocked with mucus, and the child suffocated in her arms from her trying to make her nurse. And milk ran out of her mouth, eyes rolled back in her head. She yelled at her husband, there's something wrong with the doctor. The doctor got the husband got the doctor on the phone and said, jump in the car and get over here to the hospital, because they didn't live very far away from a certain hospital in Austin, Texas. They got over there and the emergency team alerted, met him at the curb and whisked the baby away and resuscitated the baby.
Oh.
Age 8 weeks. 3.5 years later, the mother was driving the child was in the car with her, and she was driving past the hospital where the child had been resuscitated. Now, she'd never told the child about this experience, but as the hospital was going by, she pointed at it, the little girl pointed at it and said, oh, look, Mommy, that's where Jesus brought me back to you. And the mother nearly wrecked the car because she'd never told her about this.
Right.
She got off the expressway and said, what did you say? And the child said, you know, Mommy, Jesus came and got me, but he brought me back to you there. Now, that child was 8 weeks old at the time, and now 3.5. That lady drove straight to my church and blurted out this story. And that lady never missed church after that. And the child, now in Sunday school for the first time, at age 4 and at age 5, was present when the Sunday school teacher was taking the opportunity to talk about the Christian concept of death. And because her grandmother had just died in each class a year apart. And the child spoke up and said, "Oh yes, when you die, Jesus comes and gets you. But if it's not your time, he brings you back."
On that note, check out videos of the International Association for Near-Death Studies Conference. You can look at past events. You can go to the IANDS website. You can subscribe and purchase events, talks that are going on right now at this conference. And it is the ultimate exploration of the infinite journey that is waiting for all of us. John, thanks so much for your friendship, for your work.
My great pleasure. My great pleasure, David.
And do check out the book, Revealing Heaven, The Christian Case for Near-Death Experiences.
In my book, I refer to that soldier as Private Alberto, A for Alberto, A for first person that I really believed. Turned my thinking around.
Yeah.
He's in the book.
Amazing. Okay. Have a great day.
Thank you, Dave.